Hello, everyone, and welcome to AR Public Live. My name is Christina Rapatsky. I'm assistant editor at the Architectural Review, and I'm here with Manon Muller, the editor of the AR. We're delighted to have gathered you all in this virtual room today for this conversation. So just some quick housekeeping first. If you haven't already, please switch to gallery view so that you can see the room rather than just one speaker. And please ensure that you're muted at all times to avoid any unintended interruptions. And you'll have seen the notification already, but this is also just to say that this conversation is being recorded. A little bit first about the AR Public Awards. So the AR Public Awards are a celebration of open and accessible public spaces, spaces that are increasingly under threat today, facing hostile commercial and political forces. With the biennial AR Public Awards, which we launched 2 years ago in 2022, we wish to recognise the importance of creating, rescuing and renovating public spaces all around the world. This year's judging panel brought together Ricky Burdett, Professor of Urban Studies at the London School of Economics. Ricky unfortunately can't join the conversation today. He sends his apologies. Aziza Chaouni, Associate Professor of Architecture at the University of Toronto and the founding principal of Aziza Chaouni Projects based in Toronto and Fez. And Günther Vogt, founder of Vogt Landscape Architects in Zurich with offices all over Europe. Entries to the AR Public Awards were reviewed anonymously by the judges, who then picked a short list of 15 exceptional public spaces. From this shortlist, the judges selected 6 finalists, which were visited by independent critics before a decision was made on the winner, based on the critics' reports. This year's winner, the Dún Laoghaire Baths, just south of Dublin in Ireland, by DLR Architects Department and A2 Architects, is a redevelopment of historic 19th century baths that includes the restoration of a pavilion, a new jetty, a changing canopy, a refurbished gazebo, and much more. And in fact, there's been some recent developments to the project even since we sent the AR Public issue to press. We're delighted to have Peter Carroll from A2 Architects, along with Andrée, Dargan and Sarah Clifford from DLR Architects Department joining us today. And before I hand the virtual stage over to them, I'd just like to add that the AR Public issue is available to purchase. This is what it looks like. It's available to purchase at architectural-review.com/shop. The issue includes the write-up by Lisa Godson of the winning project, as well as the articles on the other 5 highly commended and commended projects. It also includes 5 in-depth reportages that revisit existing public spaces, such as the High Line in New York, Meskel Square in Addis Ababa, and Copacabana in Rio, to examine their changing uses over time. And so it's a reminder to us all of the absolutely critical role that public spaces play in urban life. It's a really fantastic issue, and I urge you to seek it out. All orders from the shop help support the editorial work that we do, especially subscriptions. So we're going to start now with a short presentation by DLR Architects Department and A2 Architects about their winning project. Then together, first with the judges and then with everyone here, we're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions and discuss the role of public space more generally. And you can ask questions using the chat box. And after the presentation, when we come to that stage of the conversation, you can also unmute yourself and ask in person if you wish. But with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Andrée, Sarah, and Peter.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I'm Andrée Dargan. I'm the County Architect at DLR County Council, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here today to speak about our overall vision for this project, the redevelopment of the Dún Laoghaire Baths. This project was a collaboration between ourselves at DLR Architects and A2 Architects, and we feel it's an exemplar of collective and collaborative working between the public and the private sector architecture teams. We also had a number of other dedicated consultant disciplines on the project team. And I would like to acknowledge the very high calibre of the other 14 finalists, as well as all those that submitted such great projects for these awards. And we are honoured, obviously, to have won this award in such company. We feel that this demonstrates as well the value of high quality public sector led design and cements the recognition of Dún Laoghaire town as a place of quality design. It's a great addition to public laigh and to public realm of Dún Laoghaire, and we look forward to everybody visiting it. I will start with the project context and connectivity, and I'll be followed by Sarah on the site conditions and our proposals, and then Peter will speak on the definition and the detail.
Sorry, Andrée and Sarah, can I just ask you to switch to presentation mode, please? I'm not sure which of you has control of the screen so that we can see your slides full screen. I think that would be nice. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the Baths project has taken many, many years, and while a large number of people have played a significant part in bringing the project to fruition, we must recognise the role played by Bob Hannon. We all know that to see a project of this complexity through to such a quality conclusion, you need a project champion, and Bob was very definitely this project's champion for well over a decade. Sadly, we lost Bob to motor neurons disease less than a year ago. Thankfully, he did get to see how the public were beginning to join the area and were beginning to make the space their own. In a minute, I'm going to talk about the project's concept development. Before that, I'll tell you a little bit about how the project sits in the wider Dún Laoghaire area. But first, I want to look at the location and the historical context.
Sorry to interrupt again, but I don't think we can see your screen still. So if it can be shared.
Please, I can see it.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
Okay. I can see the map, the satellite image.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. So Dublin County is located on the east coast of Ireland, and within Dublin there are 4 administrative local authority areas, of which DLR is the smallest, and it's located south of the city centre. And you can just pick out Dún Laoghaire Harbour there in the image. Dún Laoghaire Harbour is about 200 years old, and it covers about 250 acres, of which about 200 acres are in the water. It has 6 piers, 2 lighthouses and 4 yacht clubs. It's the largest marina in Ireland with over 800 berths, and the piers are the largest protected structure in Ireland. The harbour was established as a port of refuge for Dublin Bay, and throughout the years it had many functions. It had from prison ships bound for Australia to coal importation to mail boats to the UK, passenger car ferries, and much more recently leisure. It was built with rock from Dalkey Quarry, which is a few miles away, and transported by rail. And the narrow metals route is still here today and is now used as a pedestrian and cycle route. Our site at the Dún Laoghaire Baths is just outside the harbour walls to the left of the photo, and will form part of a master plan that we're embarking on for the future of the harbour area. Dún Laoghaire is a place of great history, and we're adding our contribution to that history here now. The first baths were located on a smaller site closer to the East Pier, and they were constructed in 1843 by a private developer, and they were named the Royal Victoria Baths when Dún Laoghaire town was known as Kingstown. The current Dún Laoghaire Baths is located on high ground and enjoys panoramic views. Historically, this had led to the site previously being developed as a military battery associated with the now demolished nearby Martello Town in the People's Park. Investigations indicated, however, that although fragments and masonry work did survive, the battery complex had been dismantled and incorporated into the Baths complex. The geometries were complex, and we have worked them into our design so that the shapes of the paths that we see today reflect the twists and turns of the rocky foreshore and the battery. This is an image of the earlier pool. Then in 1896, Kingstown Urban District Council purchased the current bath site, and the new baths were built and formally opened in 1908. They include state-of-the-art facilities for sea bathing, a gentleman's swimming pond and a separate ladies' swimming bath, both with showers, and for the ladies furnished dressing boxes. Over £11,000 was invested by the Urban District Council. The intention was that the baths were both recreational and very practical. In an era when bathrooms were not the norm in housing, especially true in Dún Laoghaire in the 1900s, where obvious affluence hid great poverty. To coincide with the renaming of the town, the baths were renamed the Dún Laoghaire Baths in 1920. And this 1933 photo shows the baths in their heyday with Lido-style architecture. And indeed, the 1930s was considered to be the golden age of Lido-style facilities. The Dún Laoghaire Baths was advertised as being a full spa treatment resort, as well as having the course swimming, attractions and a tea room. But the working year was short from Whitsunday weekend to the end of September. Throughout the decades, generations of children and adults enjoyed the facilities. You can see the little bandstand in these historical postcards, and we have rebuilt this as part of our scheme. By the mid-1980s, however, the popularity of open-air baths was declining and frequently attributed to the provision of indoor swimming facilities by the local authorities and also the increased availability of affordable foreign holidays. The Rainbow Rapid slides were added to the baths in 1985 to attract the younger generation. While initially hugely popular, the length of the season and the cost of the upkeep proved too much to keep the baths open and the rapids, and eventually they closed to the public in 1997. Most people were unaware that the building was also the family home of Superintendent William Hill and for his family for 41 years. Anna Murray in the picture there was born there in 1932, and she was the first member of the public to visit the redeveloped site in November 22. Roger Casement is one of Ireland's best-known patriots. He was born in Sandycove in 1864. His humanitarian work in Africa and later in Brazil was rewarded with a knighthood. However, his support for the cause of Irish nationalism caused him to be arrested, charged with high treason, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and then executed in Dublin in 1916. As part of the redevelopment plans, we wanted to create a visual marker with a setting for a special feature, and 100 years after his death, we commissioned Mark Richards to complete a bronze statue of Casement for this location. The statue is in a prominent position at the edge of Dublin Bay, symbolically facing towards the GPO in the centre of Dublin with his back to England. So Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown was formally formed in 1994 and it has two major towns. It's quite urban, but there is a rural area to it as well. And since 1998, we have had policies on how we want Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown to develop written into our county development plan. And we've been completing these incrementally ever since as opportunities allow. The 1998 plan included a specific objective to promote the development of a water and leisure centre at the Dún Laoghaire Baths area. In 2004, 20 years ago, the County Development Plan introduced the Urban Structure Plan for the first time, which identified a range of future development sites and sought upgraded pedestrian permeability throughout the town. Then we incorporated further urban framework plans in 2010, in 2016 and in 2022. And the current urban framework plan has three themes: reconnecting the town with the waterfront, placemaking and creating vitality, and strengthening links with the adjoining areas. Some examples of these are this little example of George's Place. It's using an infill social housing scheme to regenerate one street and to create a new street, thus reconnecting the town centre with the waterfront. This is our metals project for placemaking and creating vitality, where we covered over the railway cutting and it has become a place for promenading, for sitting, for dining, for playing. This is our coastal mobility route for strengthening links with adjoining areas. It's a 4.5 kilometre coastal walking cycling route where we upgraded villages along the route. Many of this work was done during COVID, and some of these temporary works are now being rebuilt as permanent schemes. Whether our interventions in Dún Laoghaire are small or large, whether the refurbishment are new, temporary or permanent, we follow the same guiding principles set out all those years ago. So the redevelopment of the Bath site is a further core part of our strategy of linking the town centre to the seafront by way of upgrading public realm to a very high standard, and it's another step in our implementation of our overall vision for the town. And this was recognised by the award of Dún Laoghaire as the Great Town 2022 by the Academy of Urbanism. Following their closure, the buildings in the entire site of the Baths fell into disrepair. The site is very exposed and regularly takes a beating from the sea. Over the intervening years, numerous plans were put forward for the site redevelopment in various forms, including public-private partnerships with early architectural ideas competition and a scheme in 2003. From the outset, however, local feelings ran very high, and by 2001, a renewal group, a heritage and renewal group had formed with the aim of restoring the Baths and keeping the site in public ownership. This group later grew into SOS, Save Our Seafront. Then in 2005, the council introduced a controversial £140 million proposal involving park privatisation with an over 8-storey complex comprising residential, shops, restaurants and maritime leisure facilities. This spurred various interested focus groups into action, and a number of protests were arranged that summer. And these culminated in an exceptionally large protest with up to 4,000 attending and a march past the Baths. In the face of overwhelming popular pressure, the proposal was dropped. Further initiatives then followed in 2007 and also in 2010. So All of these unsuccessful initiatives led to the formation of the Bath Subcommittee in 2010, which was a cross-party group of local elected councillors, and they set down a framework for any redevelopment of the Bath that should have regard to. So as a result, the design commenced in our department, DLR Architects, with Bob as the project architect. Our aim was to take the brief from the Bath Subcommittee and to give this brief a physical form by designing a sensitive scheme that was at the same time of high design quality. As architects, we have the opportunity to make an impact on the landscape and to create the built environment of the future. And we are honoured as local authority architects to be able to make our mark, and also to facilitate private architects making their mark on the public realm for generations to come. We appreciate the responsibility this brings, and we hope and feel that this project has done justice to this responsibility. So taking on board the subcommittee's recommendations, our development strategy for the site was to provide for the continuing public use of the area by securing the Baths Pavilion itself and providing activities that would give new life, removing the dilapidated structures to permit the creation of new routes with landscaping to connect the walkway at Newtownsmith, which leads to Sandycote in the south, to both the East Pier and the People's Park, and creating enhanced facilities for swimming and access to the water edge. We conducted public consultations, environmental awareness assessments, and had to regularise an historic title with the foreshore application. Ultimately, in 2015, we received planning approval for our scheme. We're on site completing additional pathways that were referenced earlier on at the moment, accessibility routes, and we have further plans to connect this area over as far as the East Pier, but there for the future. For now, we're delighted that this spectacular new addition to the coastline is open, with access to outdoor public spaces having taken on a whole new significance in recent years for us all. It's wonderful that this breathtaking space is now accessible for everyone. Sarah will now take you through the next part of the presentation.
So this next section of the presentation, I guess, is the sandwich in between the explanation Andrée gave just for the starting off the context and the history of the project and how it's set within Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown, and then the actual built construction of the design that Peter will move forward with. So again, this mid-section, as Andrée described, took us over 6 years from the Bath subcommittee in 2010 all the way up to the design team in 2006. So this aerial view shows us what was left of the Baths pavilion before we actually started the reconstruction. So this is the main road here moving through Dún Laoghaire along the main seafront. The small building at the top there is the pavilion building, which we kept, and then you can just see the roof there of the small wash house to the left. All of these buildings here were demolished, but the bandstand there, as Andrée mentioned, was reconstructed. This takes us with the middle level of the site. So the site itself has been reconstructed into the main 3 levels. So we have the top level and the entrance coming into the main pavilion, the middle level that takes you from the bandstand and creates the link and the walkway to Newtownsmith, and then the lower plaza level, which had the old existing baths there. There was a few elements of the lower level that we kept, so we kept the existing seating arrangement to the lower level there and reconstructed these little individual benches along the seafront. So moving on, just to show you and give you some kind of idea as to the condition that we were looking at for the site as we embarked on the project. So this is the pavilion in its state when we first found it. We kept the original entrance and the main 3 elevations of the main pavilion building. All of the rear of the pavilion was taken down, and again to the right there you can just see the roof of the existing wash house, which was kept and refurbished. Inside views of the pavilion itself, the top left is the washroom, and then all of these other 2 photographs of the main pavilion, and then the little area, the back rooms to the rear. The external condition, these are the existing seats which were kept and refurbished, and then you can see the condition of the existing baths that were there at the beginning and the deterioration that was continuing. Again, this is a view moving on to Newtownsmith. So this wall was removed and replaced with railings to give better view into the facility itself, and also outwards to the sea. And these are the existing benches that were kept, and you'll be able to see the outline as Peter goes through his photographs, again with the reconstruction of these little benches and the new pavilion, which extends outwards. So as Andrée mentioned, the subcommittee had three main points that we needed to work with. There was the retention of the existing pavilion building here, and the smaller outbuilding, the wash house to the right. The rest of the existing buildings were demolished. They were all of a later date. The pavilion itself was to have gallery, artist studios, and a cafe. And the original baths entrance was to be retained and to be made into an access for the pavilion building itself. An outdoor terrace was to be created so that people could relax and enjoy the views that were now created from the whole new facility. The connection of the walk along Newtownsmith finally connecting to the East Pier, and you can see that this follows the line of the mid-level all the way from Newtownsmith through the bandstand and up along to the East Pier. So again, the walkway, as it meanders through the site, reflects the outline of the shore as was existing, and also the line of the old battery that was there and removed. Then there was a creation of facilities for swimming. The new jetty was required to take swimmers further into the sea and away from the rocky shoreline. And then also the connection of the steps. These are the main steps that lead you down all the way from People's Park, and the crossing over the road down through the site, traversing all of the levels and onto the jetty. And then again, the decision was made that the casement statue would be placed at the end of the jetty in the most prominent position. So in 2016, the Memorials Committee approved the erection of a statue to commemorate Roger Casement. The design for this, or the procurement for this, went over two phases. So there was initial expressions of interest, and then after that they were decided as to which artist was the most preferred, and a shortlist was created. Visual Artists of Ireland were engaged to manage the process. The statue itself is 1.5 life size and about 3 meters tall from the base of the left heel to the top of his head. You'll be able to see wherever he is on the site at the end of the jetty. The relationship changes depending on which level you're actually at, from the top level to the mid-level to the lower level, and his connection with horizon and the shore. So these further 3 sketches are ones that formed part of our planning process. So this is a view north from Newtownsmith going along the mid-level of the walkway. There's the main pavilion there in the background and the wash house to the left. This is from the bandstand looking south. So again, you can see the main pavilion building, the original piece of sloped ground, taking the main walkway through in front of the pavilion itself to the rear. And then the view that we have from the new jetty looking back towards the pavilion building and the terrace for people to sit and enjoy the relationship and the connection that we have with the lighthouse to the East Pier and the Martello Tower in Sandy Cove. So moving on from this, at this stage in 2016, we then engaged the design team to come on board with us and collaborate in terms of moving the forward onto design and final construction. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Peter.
You just need to unmute yourself, Peter.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Andrée and Sarah, for the presentation so far. This is such an honor to be talking to this audience, and I want to thank Manon, Christina, Emily, Ashi, and indeed Günther for inviting us on here. I also want to thank my own team, Aidan, Risa, and my whole office, and indeed the Clerk of Works that we've been working with, Connor Geraghty, Fiona Roach in particular, and indeed Andrew or Aidan and many others, including Ivar, and indeed Bob. There's so many people to thank. But I want to just note one thing. Lisa Godson's text was absolutely breathtaking, and we were so pleased to read her text. And I also want to thank the photographers of whose work you will see, because it's a further translation of our work. Now, I can't seem to move on, Sarah. I might need to ask again. No, this won't move. I can't seem to move. I'm sorry, unfortunately.
Have you tried pressing enter rather than the arrow?
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Oh,
That's
there we go.
perfect. Thank you, Christina. I want to open with a print from 1850, and it's quite a beautiful view. It's an unknown artist, and it's of a quarry in the foreground with the completed East Pier in the middle ground with Vogt Head in the background. So it's a view called Vogt Head from Kingstown, which is now Dún Laoghaire. And I suppose what I like very much about this image, and it's been something that we've referred back to again, as we carry Dún Laoghaire Architects Department's very carefully considered urban framework plan, and indeed the Part 8 through to fruition. We almost needed to find the right measure and realize the right scale in each gesture. So in many ways, when you're looking at this very beautiful site, which is in the foreground, just below the rocks here, this is likely to be People's Park, which is directly behind the pavilion, which was a quarry in the past. And a lot of the stone for the making of East Pier and its revetment were from sites like this and Dalkey Quarry, very, very close to the site, which were connected by the metals. But I quite like the sense of ground in this, and the fact that it's not quite finished, not ever finished, and in some ways both architectural and archaeological. And speaking to Lisa's very beautiful article for Architecture Review, she notes the elemental qualities, and we spoke of this image and its importance, and in relation to the scale and the size of these big bulky pieces of granite stone that were cut from very local quarries and deposited to make the revetment and the construction for these East Pier. And in some ways, when you're in this kind of zone, you're thinking about the immediate scale as well as the distant scale. So you have this horizon, and at once you enter into this almost relational reflection between the immediate and the distant. And in that regard, there was a kind of a very strong challenge on our part to try and find a language and find a construction and find a way of detailing the project that would allow for these scales to relate to one another. This is another photograph, not very well resolved in terms of its resolution, but it was a photograph that was taken by a friend of mine from Sandy Cove, which is the 40-foot. And it looks back towards the wonderful skyline of Dún Laoghaire and its Victorian plastered villas and houses along the promenade. What's quite beautiful about this image in our mind is just the fold of the landscape. And in the back of our mind, we had obviously references like Álvaro Siza's baths in Matosinhos in Porto. But in another way, we had to kind of find another way in which to bring in the streets, another way in which to bring in the permeability and the connections. So you have this very kind of strong faceted landscape of very bold elemental shapes that capture the light as it goes from the east to the south to the west. And we quite like this kind of geological layer that the project suggests. It's both between the level of the town and the level of the water. And you have all of these elemental angles and cuts. Another photograph of the construction, and in many ways we felt we were archaeologists as much as architects on this project, because we kept on finding things and digging things up and hiding and concealing and exposing. But what's also very, very nice about this image is if you see to the background, you have the crest of the Dalkey quarry and the rock face that was left. And this is a scar from the amount of granite that came from that site down to Dún Laoghaire Harbour in order to make the East and West Pier and indeed Carlisle Pier. So we were kind of very, very conscious of that relational distance between things that came from a very, very close background. You'll also see the incredible challenge that we had throughout this, in particular around accessibility, where you're going from the level of Queen's Road right down to the water. And you have a level difference of 8 meters down to the jetty level, and then a further meter to 2 meters down to the water. And all of this happens at a very kind of tight, pinched point. But what I quite like about this image as well is almost like the little erection or kind of temple front that sits, the little gable front of the pavilion that sits up there with its kind of plastered, almost Greek columns. And we tried to retain the importance of the pavilion as one would see it, as a standalone object out from the terraced kind of landscape of Dún Laoghaire. So just some drawings to put it in context. We're going from left to right on the top section. You have the 3-story over basement Victorian terraces that are largely continuous. You have the train lines. You have Queen's Road now with the coastal mobility route. Then we have the pavilion down into the intermediate level. So on the upper level, we have a cafe and changing places toilet. On the lower level, 4 artist studios with an intermediate area outside, and then further on down into the larger communal area with access to the jetty and to the waterfront. And again, this kind of long elevation to the bottom, showing the resting of this pavilion with its newly elevated presence onto the seafront, which we gave in part of this project. So we chose not to make plans. We kind of echoed plans very, very quickly in favor of making models. And a lot of this was generated by perspective and perspectival study. And in many ways, it came from Bob's and ours and Sarah's and André's interaction with the site and trying to ensure that this was as connective and as permeable as possible. As Sarah noted, we tried to retain as much of and rehabilitate as much of the fabric of the existing baths as possible, while at the same time introducing new elements that would marry and connect with the rest of the fabric. Going from site models through to detailed models, this was a beast of a concrete model that we made, where we were looking at the faceting and armadillo-esque kind of quality to the concrete scaling of the walls originally as day pours, and trying to work delicacies into something quite robust like seats at the top. So you'll see a profile given to the seats, and in many ways, every aspect of this project is shaped by life and wanting to ensure that people would engage with it right through from the old age pensioner through to a skateboarder or to a child who might want to sit on a low level seat. As I said, once we started to uncover this project and try and retain as much as we could, we worked as conservation architects as much as architects on this project. And you will see a very, very beautiful Art Deco detailing, quite a dramatic cantilever there from the concrete moulding on the top section, and working its way down to a very gently light battered surface of wall. The reason why we had to lose the back elevation of this pavilion was because it was completely corroded and rotten A lot of the steels were embedded within the concrete, and as a result, we had to take it out. So there's a fourth seaward elevation added to this pavilion. And Sarah noted already that the towel drying room or the washroom is there to the left as a kind of a lower appendage onto the pavilion proper. And we continue that way of thinking through the scheme. Here you have the original rock level and the rocks worn down by the sea, with the original day pouring of concrete done as mass concrete without reinforcement, and our added layer, much like a palimpsest, onto this, not to completely take everything away, but to ensure that people could see and record the steps of construction. And images like this here, which were quite profound, in many ways we were making in archaeology. And you'll see a pool in the middle ground, along with the starting of the jetty and all of the cranking walls as they crank out to the horizon. And at times we kind of knew we had, I think, just met our goal in kind of setting out kind of measures, as I was saying, trying to find the right measure for the site and the materiality and the colouring of the project. And it's our intent, hopefully, to uncap this pool at a later point, if possible. So the materiality, getting right down into the granularity and the cellular structure of the baths, we used the Dalkey granite in the aggregate, very much in awe to, or in respect to all of the construction in the area. And you'll see that kind of bright white granite stone. And we also used a 60% GGBS in the concrete in order to lighten its carbon footprint. And we retarded the surface in order to open up the face of the concrete in order to allow for the growth of algae and lichen on the concrete that would come in contact with the ground. It also gives it this very nice warm texture. And a lot of people are quite surprised to hear that it's all concrete in many ways. But we think that's quite a beautiful thing. And I think, referring to Günther's very beautiful comments to us, you noting water, gravel and cement as being the constituents of this. And we very much agree. The other way in which we treated the concrete was to polish it and to ensure a slip resistance to the concrete. This is an external polish to the concrete, and you can see exposed stones, both limestone and granite. Just to note, there's a grading and a variation of granite kind of through the site from inside to outside, and we have oyster shell internally within the cafe floor to give it an even more special kind of character. So it kind of grades down to the rougher concretes as we go through down to the lowest level of the water. So a plan, very, very simply, you can see it's very much about paths, and referring back to Alvaro Aziza's baths in Matosinhos, which is very much about one path and one very carefully orchestrated entry. This is multiple paths, and trying to connect, as Andrée and Sarah noted, to Newtown Park Smith to the west, up to People's Park to the north, along Queen's Road and along the intermediate levels to East Pier. So in many ways, the project was quite quiet. The design was not intent on being the main stakeholder. It was meant to be laconic and background, and almost setting the stage for the life that occurs in the space. So just bringing you through a very quick derive through the project and the theatre of Queen's Road. I particularly like this moment on the site, particularly along Queen's Road, where it's very, very tight and very controlled. And in some ways, it's like the curtains to the stage. And once you're beyond that first layer, that first filter, one comes to the intermediate level and then looking down onto the theatre of the space down below. And I think it's very much some kind of space that will kind of settle into the psyche of not just Dún Laoghaire, but to Dublin City. This very beautiful view, you'll recall Sarah's opening slide of the pavilion, and we did very, very careful studies of all of the joinery and all of the plastered details. We spoke with the conservation and heritage officers in Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown and did our own in-depth study of the baths. We quite like this democratic view. Very often people associate this kind of part of the country sometimes with exclusivity. And the people who get to use the sea are the people who own and the people who have, as opposed to the people who live. And I just think this view is very beautiful, that everybody gets the opportunity to capture this chink of horizon, and that it becomes part of the public realm very much. Through into this long, almost Venetian-esque type Portego space that goes from the canal into the garden, a very, very long room with a very, very simple, discreetly detailed timber soffit that's given a beamed drop in order to control the sound and the acoustic in the space. All of the doors open inwards, very much like large French doors, so that people enjoy the intimacy of the space made by the doors. It's a very, very small cafe, together academy, along with the owners here have developed a very, very interesting social outreach, where people with learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities serve in the space. Coming down into the lower level, again, there is this gentle grand staircase made in bronze. A very, very few amount of the joinery is made in bronze to relate back to the further distant Roger casement. So all of the stairs joinery and the external terrace joinery are made in bronze. So everybody gets to touch this beautiful material as it patinates. Down to the lowest level, where we have the artists' foyer and the 4 artist studios. And in the background, you see the double doors into the drying room, or the towel drying room or washroom, as Sarah recalls. Every single window, both inside and outside in this space, is given a bench. And we were very, very keen that people would sit and enjoy and loll the space and the passing by. So it was trying to slow people down in many ways, and trying to get every generation of person to be able to enjoy the space gently. This is into the refurbished washroom, which is now a kind of a 3-monthly residence for temporary space for artists. And you can see all of the accessibility works with the Belfast sinks in the honed black granite and oak stands. And then through into the intermediate level, coming out from the towel drying room, you see the first battering of wall. So this is our only elevation that we make to the sea. And we felt it was fitting that we would bring the language of the granite and the aggregate up to this pavilion. So the first facade is a plastered piano nobile with a long balustrade in bronze again, that sits atop a very gently cambered concrete wall that is for the artists, and into which we have these benches and terraces for summer works and other works. Very importantly as well, Dermot Foley, the landscape architect, worked with us here on this project, and he wormed through this very beautiful landscape along with Andrée, Bob and Sarah, in continuing that kind of marine landscape through the site. So you have Scots pines and grasses and strawberry and other hardy plants to deal with the kind of the seaward aspect. These are just some kind of moments. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, Peter. We just want to make sure that we have enough time for questions.
I'm nearly finished. I'm sorry, Christina.
Sure. Thank you.
I tend to rabbit on. Apologies. I'll go through.
It's all good. Thank you.
Not at all. This is the bandstand towards Joyce's Tower in Sandy Cove in the far right-hand side. And then down to the lowest level, the materials of granite and concrete with the exposed aggregate at the very top. And then beautiful moments here of a roller skater doing her thing on the lowest level. Knitters up above, by the way, I must say, American knitters. And then the great roller skaters. And we were kind of very keen to make edges for these people. It wasn't about putting up hostile studs or anything else. It was very much to ensure that we incorporate people. Casual moments like this, when the water comes in, seaweed comes onto the ground, it's washed back. And then a very, very simple canopy, and then benches to the coast, down to the water, a view back towards the pavilion, and then the kind of serenity of a summer view out with casement on the horizon. And I just want to finish with one image here. this is our Casper David Friedrich pond with water coming in and flooding the lowest level. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, Andrée and Sarah, for a wonderful presentation, and also congratulations on being the winners of the AR Public Awards. We have about 15 minutes left of our hour, so I'm going to quickly bring in one of the judges, Günther Vogt, to sort of kick us off on a conversation, and then we can take a few questions as well. I'm curious, Günther, in the judging session, you praised this project as calm, robust, and accessible. And quite interestingly, I thought, coming from a landscape architect, you said, I don't expect much greenery here. You already have so much nature with the sky and the sea. The sea is the real landscape here. So perhaps, Günther, you could respond to this project from the point of view of a landscape architect, and kind of thinking about the inherent publicness of the sea as a landscape.
Yeah, thank you. But first of all, I would like to say something about the other applications, because we had many applications. I would only say 2 sentences about it. What we find to really encourage these teams, what we find super interesting is that these colleagues don't understand public space as a plaza, as a park, whatever, but it's always shared with a building. So it's partly in a building and partly outside. And I would like to encourage, if we have somebody in the audience, to really go on this way. But coming to the winning project, I completely agree. Of course, I was, as you can imagine, I was criticized because of concrete, carbon footprint, and so on. But in this case, I find it, I mean, the sea is not to be, hopefully I'm not post-colonial. For me, the sea all over the world is a public space. I mean, to be correct, I don't know whether the Irish Sea is belonging to me, but looking out, it is a public space. And what we found interesting is what happens when the sea, and you could see it in the little video, and it's not only a nice and soft space, it can be very brutal, very hard. And we found it's really interesting to use, in this case, concrete. And since I'm coming from Switzerland, you know, we only have 3 resources, education, landscape, and concrete. So therefore, I was socialized by Swiss architects to use concrete. And in this case, I really thought it's really important to have some kind of resistance against this nature, against this power of the sea. And the only material was, for me, concrete. And I think that's, and of course it had to be, like in this case, it had to be a mixture between architecture and landscape. Not to say it is a fortification or so on, but what we found out when looking, we only had drawings, and so we couldn't judge only through the drawings, but what we could feel, and that I would really mention to the younger people in the audience, we could really feel it was worked out from a physical model. You could really see it in the drawings, and that was for us really interesting. And I mean, the choreography you mentioned with the stairs and the footpaths along this in between the sea and the city, and how do you touch the city? And what we found really interesting is that it wasn't let's say a grand gesture like in the Mediterranean. So for instance, a cafe you showed, it's not too big. It's really related to the city and not to make a big gesture to the sea. And that's what we found really interesting. And this idea, you could see it in the last photos, the idea of a stage. You're part of a stage. So you're a bit like Caspar David Friedrich, you're looking out and you are in his back, like the statue, But it's the same is with the people using this public space. So you're always in the back having the same view as these people in front of you. So we found it really, really interesting as a public space in an existing public space.
I mean, if I can add to that,
Yes, please.
Günther, I think we kind of wanted to very quickly with everyone on board to inculcate a kind of a sense of humility in the face of matters such as climate change and accessibility, much larger than any individual or collective. In many ways with this public space, and it's very much a background for life.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time and making sure that we open up to let the audience also ask questions. And so please use the chat function. If you have a question, I can read it out, or if you prefer, you can use the reactions to sort of raise your hand virtually, and you can ask the question in person. But I'll use my moderator's privilege and just ask a question first myself. Which is actually based on one of the other judges' comments during judging. So Ricky Burdett, who's not here, but something he stressed throughout the judging process was the importance of public bodies commissioning public space. And in fact, when you look at the 6 finalists on this shortlist, 5 were commissioned by public bodies and 1 by an NGO. So that idea was very much reflected in the wider shortlist. And so I was wondering if you can say a little bit more about the kind of collaboration between DLR Architects Department, which is part of the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, and A2, and how working within a public body on a project like this may be different, quite different from working with like a corporate client, for example.
Andrée, do you want to take that?
I'll start maybe, and then Peter, you can come in.
Okay.
Yes, we're an architects department within a local authority, so we're one department. So we generally do the design and building work for all the different departments, you know, housing, libraries, parks, different projects, public realm, all that. But we can also get the opportunity to, I suppose, create sites and, you know, to find areas that we want to develop ourselves. And that was how, for example, the metals project came about, the covering over the railway there in Dún Laoghaire. So that's a good benefit. We do work like an architectural practice in that when we develop our own schemes, we do have to go around to all the other disciplines and work as almost as though we were a private practice. But I suppose we do have that opportunity to work within the space between the buildings, as opposed to maybe in a regular situation, an architectural practice might be given a building plot and asked to work within that. So we can actually work in the external spaces and space. We can create those, you know, wider spaces and link projects together. We are a practice. We have about 30 people in our practice. So some projects we do from start to finish ourselves. Some projects we give out from the start and commission people from the outset. And sometimes we work in collaboration. So quite a lot of time we do work in collaboration, because I suppose we have talented architects in-house and they want to use their skills. So we often take it up as far as our version of planning, which is called a Part 8, where our elected councillors then make the decision on the planning scheme, and we move forward from there. So we often take on private sector teams after that to assist us and to bring added value and to work alongside us, and with varying levels of how much input we have and how much collaboration going forward. So every scheme is different. But I suppose in this particular project, it was a very successful collaboration with Peter's team and with ourselves, because we were involved right throughout the project at all the decision making, etc. And then the council itself was the client. So the funding was essentially from the council's sort of coffers, with a small amount of funding from a European fund. But that therefore means the funding often comes from development levies. So when developers would, you know, proceed with projects, a levy would come to the council for communities or for transportation use or for civic buildings, etc. So it came from that. Peter, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, like firstly, it was such an honor, and it continues to be an honor to work with DLR on this project. It's by no means finished. And I have to say, we purposefully decided to blur the line between public and private on this project. We knew we were there to assist a very, very good design team and an excellent client in DLR. And indeed, many of our models, the models that Günther refers to, are in Andrée's and Sarah's office still. And we could do a very nice exhibition of those. But it was very much a shared collaboration. I mean, and indeed, most of our work now, we much prefer to work collaboratively. And we see it as the future. But just to put some perspective on this, it's incredibly difficult to get public work in an Irish context, particularly when you set out from graduating in college. And it took me 25 years from graduating to be trusted with a project of this scale. And you know, you're in people's back gardens for the majority of your time, and you're trying to get work. And this was a golden opportunity, and we knew we had to do our best, and we knew we had to ensure that people would be happy and content with what we did. So that was very much in the background as we worked through this. And I would like it to be an exemplar for others wishing to do public work, that there are opportunities there to collaborate with the likes of excellent Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, who are flag bearers in this regard, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll read out or summarize. So I think two questions. One is about the kind of precedents you mentioned looking at Aziza, but if you could say a little bit about the references that you had. And then there's two questions which are about uncapping the pool, and what, if you can clarify a little bit or say a bit more about what the likelihood of that happening is in the immediate future.
Okay, I might take the reference, and Andrée and Sarah, you might take the uncapping question. Throughout the coast of Ireland, we have incredibly beautiful swimming lidos and facilities, and indeed very, very close to our site on the north side of the city, you have Herbert Simms' terrific swimming facilities, and they might be as modest as a canopy or a bench or a wall. We also have Alexander Nimmo's, the great Scottish architect, his heritage that has been given to us, and they go from very, very large infrastructural jetties and bridges through to very, very small, modest jetties on the west coast. So in many ways, it's a project that has many references, many contemporary. If you think about Carlos Prata's work in Porto, indeed Alvaro Siza's work, and all of the work in the United Kingdom as well. We indeed got a lot of our granite for the breakwater from, or the rock armor from Cornwall, and we had an amazing visit to there. But I would say it was very much about kind of listening and leaning to the Part 8 and to the urban framework, and insisting that that was what drove the project, and thinking very, very carefully about that reflection, that relational reflection between the immediate and the distant throughout the project. I hope that answers the question. Andrée, would you like to take the pool?
Yes, yes, the pool is a very sensitive matter, obviously. I suppose if you go back to the time when the Baths Subcommittee set our brief, it was a slightly different era of swimming in Dublin anyway. There was a time, sort of a generation ago, when parents would let their children out for the day and say, come back at tea time. But the time when we were developing this brief, it was very much in the era of parents were taking their children to indoor swimming pools, and they were sitting in the gallery watching the child in the pool, etc. And they weren't really letting them out of their sight. So I suppose it was in that context that the outdoor swimming, there were people who were doing the daily dip and down in the 40-foot nearby and in other locations. But I suppose generally people had moved towards the indoor pool setup. And when the Baths Subcommittee set our brief, they very much wanted public swimming facility access but it wasn't to be a pool at that time. But what we had to do was not preclude the future development of a pool. So I suppose when we were doing that design, we were trying to accommodate that in any design decision we made. And initially we had designed in the pier or the jetty, and that lower area, that's the large plaza area now, that would just have been rock armor. It wouldn't actually have been, you know, a public space per se. And as we went through the design development, we made that more accessible. So I suppose it's much more apparent now that, well, the pool could have been there. Whereas in the original concept, that was just going to be rock and the water washing up on it, as Peter has shown in some of the slides there. So because the project was so complex and we were basically rebuilding the shoreline, and we were, you know, the road was being, you know, undermined and all sorts, there was a lot of construction work, and we knew it would be very difficult to come back and have to do this again in the future if we did get a change brief down the line. So we made that decision to put the pool in while we were constructing and then cap it, but we did not have permission for it, planning permission for it, and we couldn't have actually just inserted it the way it was and opened it up. So we have always said we haven't precluded putting a pool in, but obviously if we did proceed to put a pool in now, we know the exact size and location. There isn't an option to move it down a few meters, etc. So the councillors would know that. But what we have committed is that we will be doing a planning application for a future phase of this area, and that may or may not then include the pool and the links to the East Pier, and we need more public toilets and to do the little shelters over at the East Pier. We will start with a feasibility study, and there are a lot of considerations to be taken on board. And there is a growing opinion as well that people actually like the public space down there the way it is, and that they're happy with the sea swimming. So it's a very mixed view at the moment as to what actually will be the solution. But we will be going through a process when we get this phase completed. We just haven't got the bandwidth right now to start in, because we have a number of other public civic buildings going on at the moment as well. But when this stage is done, we'll be starting again with the feasibility study to consider the pool and the other works that need to be done down there. So another 12 months might tell a lot, you know.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. I think our hours is up. In fact, we're a few minutes past. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you, Peter, Andrée, Sarah, our judges, and everyone who's joined this conversation and contributed in the chat. Yes, congratulations again on winning, and I hope that you will stay in touch with the AR. We've got some great new issues. The September one is brewing away, and we can't wait to share it with you. And bye for now.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.